I was happy with true love until someone made me believe it wasn't enough.
My name is Elina, and I am 26 years old, a woman whose life once seemed simple, peaceful, and full of quiet happiness in a small village surrounded by endless green fields and distant mountains that glowed gold at sunset. I lived with my husband Karim, a hard-working man of 30, whose hands were always rough from labor, but whose heart was softer than anyone I had ever known. And although we had very little money, we shared a deep love that made our small home feel warmer than any palace. Every morning, Karim would wake up before the sun, prepare his tools, and head to the fields, while I stayed behind to take care of our home, cook simple meals, and sometimes visit our kind neighbor Fatima, an older woman who treated me like her own daughter, and often reminded me that true happiness is not measured by wealth, but by peace of heart. Our life was not perfect, but it was calm and honest, and every evening when Karim returned tired yet smiling, we would sit together under the dim light of a small lamp, talking about our dreams and laughing at small things that made our hearts feel full. One day, however, everything began to change when a rich man named Samir moved into the large villa near our home, bringing with him expensive cars, elegant clothes, and an air of pride that everyone in the village noticed immediately. Samir was not alone, as he often appeared with his cousin Nabil, a clever and observant man who rarely spoke but watched everything carefully, as if he understood people better than they understood themselves. From the very first moment Samir saw me, his eyes lingered in a way that made me uncomfortable, and although I tried to ignore it, I could feel that something was not right about his interest in me. Days passed, and soon Samir found excuses to come near our house, sometimes pretending to ask for directions, other times bringing small gifts like fruits or sweets, which I always refused politely, insisting that I wanted nothing from him. Despite my refusals, he continued returning, each time speaking in a soft, persuasive voice that slowly began to plant doubt in my heart, telling me that a woman like me deserved better than a life of struggle, that beauty should be surrounded by luxury, and that my husband, no matter how kind, could never give me the life I truly deserved. At first, I dismissed his words completely, laughing them off when I spoke to Fatima, who warned me firmly to stay away from such a man, reminding me that temptation often comes dressed in kindness. However, the more Samir spoke, the more his words began to echo in my mind during quiet moments, especially when I looked at my worn-out clothes, or when Karim returned home exhausted, unable to hide his fatigue despite his loving smile. One afternoon, while Karim was working far from home, Samir came again, this time bringing his sister Elina, a well-dressed woman who spoke gently but carried the same hidden intentions, and together they sat with me, describing a life filled with comfort, beauty, and admiration, a life where I would never have to worry about money or hardship again. Elina took my hand and looked at me with a sympathetic expression, saying that she could see how much I sacrificed and how I deserved to be treated like a queen, and although I knew deep inside that something about their words felt wrong, a small part of me began to wonder what it would be like to live such a life. That evening, when Karim returned home, I looked at him differently for the first time, noticing not only his kindness, but also his poverty, not only his love, but also his limitations, and those thoughts, once planted, began to grow quietly inside me, like seeds waiting for rain. Over the following days, I became more distant without realizing it. sometimes silent during our conversations, sometimes distracted while preparing meals. And Karim, being the caring man he was, noticed the change and asked me gently if something was wrong, but I always smiled and said everything was fine, hiding the confusion growing inside me. Meanwhile, Samir continued his visits, sometimes alone, sometimes with Nabil, who would observe my reactions carefully as if studying the effect of their words. And slowly their strategy became more intense, moving from simple compliments to direct comparisons between Karim's wealth and Samir's luxurious future they promised. One day, Samir showed me a beautiful silk dress shimmering under the sunlight and placed it in front of me, saying that such beauty should not be hidden behind simple clothes, and although I refused to take it, I could not deny the way my heart reacted when I touched the soft fabric. At the same time, Fatima noticed my growing silence and warned me again, telling me that people like Samir never give without expecting something in return, and that love built on money is never true love. But her words, though wise, struggled to compete with the tempting images that had already begun forming in my mind. The conflict inside me grew stronger with each passing day, as I found myself caught between two worlds, the honest, simple life I had always known with Karim, and the glittering, uncertain future that Samir kept painting for me with his carefully chosen words. Even small things began to affect me differently, like when I saw other women wearing beautiful clothes in the village market, or when I noticed how people treated Samir with respect and admiration, and slowly, without realizing it, I began to question the life I once accepted so easily. Karim, unaware of the true reason behind my change, tried even harder to make me happy, bringing small gifts, helping more at home, and speaking to me with even more kindness. But instead of bringing me closer, his efforts only made me feel more confused and guilty. One night, as I sat alone under the quiet sky, listening to the distant sounds of the village, I realized that my heart was no longer as peaceful as it once was, and that the simple happiness I used to feel was replaced by a restless desire for something more, something I could not fully understand. At that moment, I did not yet know how much my life was about to change, or how deeply those small seeds of doubt would grow, but I could feel that I was standing at the beginning of a path that would test my love, my loyalty, and my understanding of what truly matters in life. As the days passed, the quiet confusion inside my heart slowly turned into a storm that I could no longer ignore, and everything around me began to feel different, as if the life I once loved was quietly slipping through my fingers without making a sound. Samir did not stop his visits, and in fact, he became even more persistent, choosing his words more carefully and his timing more cleverly, often arriving when I felt most alone or most tired, as if he could sense the exact moments when my heart was weakest and my thoughts most vulnerable. One afternoon, he came with Nabil again, but this time they brought something new. Not gifts, but stories. Stories of women who had left poor lives behind and found happiness, comfort, and respect in the arms of wealthy men. Stories that sounded too perfect to be real, yet were told in such detail that they felt almost true. Nabil, who had always been quiet, finally spoke more openly, explaining how life is not only about love, but also about security, power, and the ability to live without fear of tomorrow. And although his tone was calm, his words carried a sharp weight that settled deeply in my mind. That same evening, I noticed Karim returning home later than usual, his clothes covered in dust, his face pale from exhaustion, and his steps slower than before. And for the first time, instead of running to greet him with joy, I stood still, watching him from a distance, feeling a strange mixture of pity and frustration that I could not explain. When he sat down to eat, he smiled at me warmly, asking about my day, but I answered briefly, my voice cold without meaning to be, and I saw the confusion in his eyes, though he said nothing, choosing silence over questions because he trusted me more than he doubted me. That night I could not sleep because Samir's words echoed again and again in my mind, mixing with the image of Karim's tired face, creating a painful contrast that made my heart feel heavier with every passing moment. The next day, something unexpected happened that changed everything even more, because while I was at the village market buying vegetables, I overheard two women speaking about me, whispering that a woman as beautiful as Elina should not be living in poverty, and that if she were smarter, she would take the opportunity that had come to her through Samir. And although they did not know I could hear them, their words struck me deeply, awakening a sense of pride and doubt that I had never felt so strongly before. When I returned home, my thoughts were no longer quiet, and I began to question not only Karim's ability to provide, but also my own choices, my own future, and the life I truly wanted. Later that afternoon, Samir came again, but this time he did not speak immediately. Instead, he placed a small wooden box on the table and slowly opened it, revealing not only gold jewelry, but also a letter, which he handed to me with a serious expression, telling me to read it carefully before making any decision. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the letter, and inside I found words that shocked me, because it was not just a promise of wealth, but a detailed plan, a life in another city, a new home, servants, comfort, and a future where I would never have to struggle again. And at the end of the letter, he wrote that he would wait for me, but not forever. At that moment, I felt something inside me shift completely, because this was no longer just temptation or imagination, but a real choice standing directly in front of me, forcing me to decide between two completely different lives. When Samir left, I sat alone for a long time, staring at the letter, imagining both futures, one filled with love but hardship, and the other filled with luxury but uncertainty. And for the first time, I could not clearly say which one I truly wanted. Meanwhile, Karim's struggles were becoming worse without me fully noticing, because he had taken on extra work to pay back the money he had borrowed for my clothes and jewelry, and every day he pushed himself beyond his limits, his body growing weaker while his determination grew stronger, all because he believed that making me happy was the most important thing in his life. One evening, as a sudden storm hit the village, Karim did not return home on time, and hours passed with no sign of him, causing a deep fear to rise inside me, a fear that cut through all my confusion and reminded me of how much I still cared. When he finally arrived, soaked from the rain and barely able to stand, I rushed to him, my heart pounding with worry, and in that moment, all the thoughts of wealth and comfort disappeared, replaced by a simple truth that I could not deny. However, the conflict was not over yet, because the very next morning, Nabil came alone, his expression serious and his tone different from before, telling me that Samir was preparing to leave the village soon, and that if I wanted a different life, this was my last chance, a final moment that would decide everything.
He looked at me carefully and said that some opportunities come only once in a lifetime and that regret is far heavier than risk, leaving me with those words as he walked away slowly without turning back. Now I stood at the edge of a decision that would change my life forever, holding the letter in my hand, looking at my small home, thinking of Karim, and feeling my heart pulled in two directions so strongly that I thought it might break. And I knew that whatever choice I made next would not only define my future, but also reveal the truth about who I really was.
That night became the longest night of my life because I did not sleep even for a single moment, and I remained sitting by the small window of our humble home, holding Samir's letter in my trembling hands, while watching the moon slowly move across the dark sky as if time itself was forcing me to choose. And with every passing minute, my thoughts grew louder, my heart heavier, and my confusion deeper than ever before. I imagined myself leaving with Samir, wearing beautiful dresses, living in a grand house, surrounded by comfort and admiration. And for a brief moment, that image felt tempting and easy, like a dream that required no effort, no sacrifice, and no patience. But then another image appeared in my mind, much quieter, yet much stronger. An image of Karim waking up before sunrise, working under the burning sun, returning home exhausted, yet smiling just to see me happy. And suddenly, I realized that one life was built on illusion, while the other was built on truth. As dawn approached, I heard Karim waking up softly, trying not to disturb me, and as I watched him prepare to leave once again for the fields, I noticed something I had been blind to for so long. His hands were injured, his shoulders tired, and his movements slower than before. Yet his eyes still carried the same love and care that had never changed since the day we got married. In that moment, something inside me broke, not in pain, but in clarity, because I finally understood that I had been measuring love with the wrong things, comparing it to gold, clothes, and empty promises, while real love had been standing in front of me every single day, silent, patient, and real. I stood up quickly and called his name, my voice shaking with emotion. And when he turned to look at me, I ran to him and held him tightly, crying in a way I had never cried before, not out of sadness, but out of regret and realization. And I told him everything, every word Samir had said, every doubt that had entered my heart, and every mistake I had made in allowing those thoughts to grow. Karim did not interrupt me. He did not shout, and he did not turn away. He simply listened with quiet pain in his eyes. And when I finished, he placed his hand gently on my head and said that love is not about never making mistakes, but about choosing each other again after those mistakes. And those words touched my soul more than anything else ever had. That same day, I made my decision, not with hesitation, but with certainty. And when Samir came one last time, expecting my answer, I walked outside with calm strength and looked at him without fear, without doubt, and without confusion. And I told him clearly that I would never leave my husband, not for wealth, not for comfort, and not for any illusion he could offer, because I had finally understood that love cannot be bought and happiness cannot be built on someone else's sacrifice. Samir tried to speak, tried to convince me one last time, but his words no longer had power over me because the weakness he once saw in my heart had been replaced by clarity and strength. And for the first time, he looked at me not with confidence, but with defeat before turning away and leaving without another word. Days passed and life slowly returned to its natural rhythm, but something had changed deeply inside me because I no longer saw our simple home as small or our life as lacking.
Instead, I saw it as something rare and valuable, something that many people search for but never find, and I began to appreciate every small moment, every shared meal, every quiet evening, and every smile that Karim gave me despite his tiredness. I worked harder than before, not out of obligation, but out of love, helping Karim in ways I had never done before, supporting him, encouraging him, and reminding him that he was not alone in carrying the weight of our life. Together, we became stronger, not because our situation changed immediately, but because our understanding of each other grew deeper than ever before. Years later, our life improved slowly but honestly, as Karim's hard work began to show results, and we were able to expand our land, build a slightly bigger home, and live with more comfort than before. But even then, we never forgot the lesson that had once almost destroyed us, because we knew that wealth can come and go, but love, once lost, is not easily found again. One evening, as we sat together watching the sunset, just like we used to in the past, Karim looked at me and smiled, and in his eyes I saw the same love that had always been there, unchanged and unshaken, and I realized that I had almost traded something priceless for something temporary, something real for something empty. From that day on, I promised myself that I would never again measure love by what can be bought, but by what is given freely, patiently, and sincerely. And I learned that true happiness does not come from having everything, but from appreciating what you already have before it is too late. And so, Karim and I lived not a perfect life, but a true one, filled with love, respect, forgiveness, and understanding. And that, more than anything else in this world, was the greatest miracle of all.
Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Turn on the notification bell so you never miss any new videos, and share this content with your friends to support us and help us grow.